I presented myself with a challenge. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, I am ranking the top 5 positions for the Louisville football team ahead of spring practice. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. On today's episode of the show, we are ranking the top 5 positions for the Louisville football team ahead of spring practice. This was not an easy exercise to partake in. I'm going to explain to you what the rubric is here shortly, but there was a lot of back and forth for this exercise, and I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. Drop your top 5 in the YouTube comment section below or under the Twitter post for the episode. So number 5 and number 4, we'll break it down into 3 segments. Number 5 and 4 will be in the first, 3 and 2 will be in the second, and number 1 will conclude the show. Number 5, we have the running back position. And what went into the decision-making behind the placement here was that there were 3 categories that I essentially went with. Number 1, and this is sort of in order as well. Number 1 is production. How many players within a position group have produced at the collegiate level? Number 2 was depth. Does the position group have a solid 2 deep? Are there some players that could rise into the occasion? And number 3, you have potential/talent. Are there players within this group that can be a force later on in the season? Is there a ton of talent, higher rated players in this group? So there's a mixture, and there's a lot of different ways that you can interpret it. There's things that you might deem more significant than others, but for me, potential was number 3, number 2 was depth, and number 1 was production. We start out at the running back room in number 5, and just because position is at number 5 or number 4, I mean, that is saying a lot, because Jet Brown and company really did a good job this offseason of addressing almost every need on the team. Starting out with running back at number 5, the Cardinals notably went out and got the MAC Offensive Player of the Year, Penny Boone. Baby Bus ran for 1,400 yards this past season for the Rockets at Toledo. 15 rushing touchdowns, 7.2 yards per carry. Spent his first couple seasons at Maryland, really couldn't get into the depth chart there. Went to Toledo, had a solid 2022, and then absolutely broke out this past season. He was one of the top running backs in the country this past year. I believe that his skill set is going to be directly translatable over to the Power 5 side of things. Now, I don't think he's going to get 1,400 rushing yards and 15 rushing touchdowns, but it wouldn't surprise me to see an Isaac Garendo-esque year to where you run for over 800 yards, double-digit touchdowns, and average over 5 yards a carry. This is going to be another balanced backfield for the Cardinals, and one of the reasons why that is because they have multiple worthy candidates to run the football. That's one of the reasons why they are at number 5. They have the production. You have Penny Boone. You also have Don Chaney Jr., the transfer from Miami, who has spent 4 seasons with the Hurricanes and rushed for over 300 yards twice. This past year, he had 478 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5.1 yards per carry. Maurice Turner is likely going to be the change of pace third down back. The third option in the room, 62 carries, 284 yards, and 1 touchdown. He spent 2 years within the Cardinals program. So you have a 3-headed monster here, and it was really tough to keep them at number 5 because when you put position by position, it's tougher to get any better than this. But running back is at number 5 for me. You have the production there. Penny Boone, even though it was in the MAC, was fantastic, and he's going to be one of the probably top 5 best running backs in the conference this upcoming year. You have Don Cheney Jr., who, if he is your backup, then you have a very, very good position group. And then Maurice Turner, who has had some moments of absolute brilliance for this team throughout the past 2 years. So, three-headed monster there. You have production, you have depth, and then you also have potential. You have 3 guys on the well, you have the 3 that you have that we mentioned that can all take the next step forward, but you also have 3 more guys backing them up. Kewan Brown, redshirt freshman from Atlanta, had a very good game against Murray State. Granted, it was Murray State, but the talent is there for the 5'9" running back from the 404. I think that he's going to be on the outside looking in again, but the potential is there. And then you brought in 2 4-star running backs. You have Duke Watson from Forsyth, Georgia. You also have Isaac Brown from Miami, who is likely the fastest player on the team. So they come in here at number 5 for me because they have an interesting mix of all 3 categories, especially, production. So makes a lot of sense here that you throw running backs into the mix, but ultimately they're going to start out the list for me at number 5. Moving on to number 4, I went with the cornerback position. The production is there. You brought some key pieces back. You brought in some very solid transfers. You've got some younger players that can fill in the depth, and they have the potential. For starters, you brought back, in my opinion, a top 2 cornerback in the ACC in Quincy Riley. Having him back completely transforms this unit. You have your CB1 already. He's able to almost shut down one side of the field by himself. So the potential to have an elite secondary is right there. And for good measure, Quincy Riley is absolutely fantastic. And having him back is key. You also brought in some key transfers, some grad transfers. Corey Thornton from UCF. I think he has 1 year remaining, if I'm not mistaken. But over 100 tackles for the Knights over the past 4 years. Started for the team, had 27 tackles this past year, 4 interceptions in his career, almost actually over 20 pass deflections as well. And having that veteran presence, 6'1" player from the city of Miami, you bring a player like him in. Also, Taz Nicholson from Illinois, sort of the same situation, but spent 3 years with the Illini, was a key piece in a very, very good defense. Has 14 pass deflections in 3 seasons, 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, 3 forced fumbles, and over 50 tackles. 5'11" from Jacksonville, Florida. He's going to be a very key piece to the puzzle that is the secondary, but a veteran presence that Pro Football Focus has deemed one of the better cornerbacks in the ACC. So 2 grad transfers that you bring in that are going to be able to fill in for the role that Jarvis Brownlee played and more. You also have Tay Holloway from North Carolina, spent 1 year there, played early on and started early on and then played sparingly through the season. 6'5" cornerback from Virginia Beach, 19 total tackles and a pass deflection. I look for him to take the next step forward. So you have your experience, you have your production with some of the veterans. Quincy Riley, Taz Nicholson. Why am I drawing a blank? I just had his name. Corey Thornton. And then also Trey Franklin, who has been sort of a key depth piece over the past couple seasons. And then you have the depth. You have production. We talked about Franklin. We talked about Tay Holloway. Also, don't forget Aaron Williams and Marcus Washington. Aaron Williams was hurt all last season, the 6'2" freshman from California. I feel like is going to play a key role for this team, at the very least, a solid depth piece. So a lot of talent, a lot of young talent. Marcus Washington, the transfer from Georgia. You did lose Marquise Groves-Killebrew, but essentially you replaced him on this year's team with Aaron Williams. So I like the production. I like the overall depth, and I like the overall talent at the position as well. You have a solid mix of veteran leadership, veteran production, and a ton of young talent that can that can grow and rise into the role moving forward. You also have some younger guys like Ramon Mosby um, and company that can definitely play in the future. But number 5, running back. Number 4, cornerback. It wasn't easy, and determining the top 3 also wasn't easy. So we're going to get into number 3 and number 2 here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. Find all the parts you need at the prices you want by going to ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Cardinal fans, just a reminder, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and also now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Continuing on along, ranking the top 5 positions for Louisville football ahead of spring practice. Such a challenging exercise to be able to get into, because there are so many qualified position groups on this team. And honestly, I kind of felt bad giving them a snub here because, I mean, they're very, very solid. And like I said, challenging to be able to differentiate between the overall position groups here. But let's go to number 3 on the list. It is the wide receiver position. A ton of turnover in this room. They lost pretty much a lot of their top receivers. Jamari Thrash to the league, Kevin Coleman Jr. and Amari Huggins-Bruce transferred. William Fowles, talented 3-star wide receiver from Miami, transferred. So it was going to be a position of need moving forward, but they brought in a ton of production, and they got 2 decorated receivers. It starts with South Alabama wide receiver Colin Lacey, a top 5 receiver in the portal, all Sun Belt first team selection for South Alabama. 91 catches, 1,316 yards to go along with 7 touchdowns, 14.5 yards per reception. Top 10 nationally in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns, and number 1 in the country over the past 2 years in forced missed tackles. So the 5'10" receiver from Mobile, Alabama will be the Cardinals wide receiver 1 and arguably a top 3, top 2 receiver in the conference coming up here in just around 6 months. So you bring the production of a player like Colin Lacey. You also go to Alabama to get Ja'Cory Brooks. Brooks had 2 solid seasons at Alabama just in 2022, 674 yards and 8 touchdowns. Had some injuries this past year. Only caught 3 passes for 30 yards, but the 6'2" native of Miami, Florida, will be a player that is relied upon a ton and likely the wide receiver 2 for the Cardinals. Has a ton of breakaway speed, has a ton of explosiveness, something that Louisville has been lacking over the past couple of years. And I look at this wide receiving group, you look at Colin Lacey and Ja'Cory Brooks, the 1-2 punch, and then you factor in Chris Bell, being in the mix. He had 407 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Jimmy Callaway, Jaden Thompson being some players that you could also look at in terms of production and depth. Antonio Meeks from the Division II level, 6'2" jump ball threat. I think he's going to play a role. So you have your starting level production: Colin Lacey, Ja'Cory Brooks, Chris Bell, Antonio Meeks, Jaden Thompson, Jimmy Callaway. Also factored into that is the depth aspect, and then the potential and overall talent: Kataris Hicks, Jalil McClain, 4-star wide receiver JoJo Stone in the 2024 class, Sean Boykins Jr., one of the best prospects in the state of Kentucky in the class. So you have the solid mix of both, and it's really hard to be able to overlook what the Cardinals have at the wide receiver position. It's going to be one of the best strengths on the team, and I'm extremely excited to be able to see what the Cardinals are going to be able to do at the receiver position, which I feel like is going to be a very, very good, is going to be a very, very effective position on this team. So number 3 for me went with the wide receiver spot. And the difference between number 3 and number 2, I think, was a little bit better depth, because the starters, well, look at the starters at the safety position, which comes in at number 2. You bring back a key player in MJ Griffin, who was very, very good in 2022 for the Cardinals, had 2 interceptions, 1 pass deflection, 1 forced fumble, and he was on the cusp of being an absolute star before he had an ACL tear. Just before the season last year, his recovery is going according to plan, which is nice to hear. He is almost back up to full speed, and I expect him to be an all ACC level player in 2024. Right next to him will be Tennessee transfer Wesley Walker. Walker had a career high 53 total tackles in the SEC this past year. 1 forced fumble, 1 sack, 2 pass deflections. He has played technically 5 seasons in the SEC, or I'm sorry, not in the SEC. He played his first 3 years at Georgia Tech and then transferred over to Tennessee. 1 year of eligibility remaining. He will spend it at Louisville. Over 100, almost close to 200 than he is 100 in total tackles. He's going to be a solid addition in the safety room, playing right alongside of MJ Griffin. So you have a very solid starting nucleus. You also have a guy in Tamarian McDonald who is going to be in the hybrid role of safety / outside linebacker / slot cornerback. But Tamarian had 40 total tackles, 55 or 40 in 2023, 55 in 2022. He has over 100 tackles in his 4-year career at Tennessee. The 6'2" native of Memphis, Tennessee, has 4 interceptions to his name, 12 pass deflections, and 1 sack that he recorded this season. But veteran leadership that you have in that position. So you have 3 really, really good starters that have played very solid Power 5 snaps. So the production is there. The upside is there at the position. And then you look sort of at the depth. You also bring in 2 solid players from the transfer portal. Blake Ruffin, 5'02" native, 6'2", 6'3" defensive back from Louisville. Will have, I believe, 2 years left, had 62 tackles for Eastern Illinois this past year, 4 pass deflections, 4 interception as well. I think that the skill set is going to be translatable over to the Power 5, but I think that he will be a depth piece for the safety spot. So you have a 5'02" native sliding into a depth role. Also brought in Day McCullough from Oklahoma. Didn't really play a ton at Oklahoma this past year as a true freshman, but the 4-star Indiana native was a top 200 player that, you know, you're factoring into the depth equation. And also some players that they brought back. Devin Neal had 74 tackles this past year, second on the team, 4 interceptions, which I believe led the team. Led the team in interceptions with 4. Had a fumble recovery Also had 6 pass deflections, which was tied for second on the team. So the depth is there. Then you factor in D'Angelo Hutchinson and some other players into the mix. So overall, you looked at the safety position. You've got the starting level production. You've got the meaningful depth, some of the most depth on the team. And then you also have some solid talent sort of waiting in the wings at this point in time. So very, very solid group. One of the best positions for the team. And if it wasn't for what the Cardinals did in the offseason for number one, they would definitely, in my opinion, slide into that number one spot. But we're going to talk about number one on this list. That is the defensive line. What the Cardinals did for that unit this year in the transfer portal is nothing short of incredible. And we're going to talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at FanDuel, the title sponsor of the show. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with the quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And then there was one. The number one position for the Louisville football team ahead of spring practice is the defensive line. That incorporates both the interior and the edge, because when you have to split them up, you have to determine whether this player is in that position or not. But excuse me, I don't know about you all, but every time like the weather changes and we get like weird cold fronts and it goes back to warm fronts and it sort of shifts back and forth, like my sinuses absolutely decide that they want to pop off the handle and go haywire. So if I sound a little raspy, I do apologize. But back to your regularly scheduled programming. Number one is defensive line. You brought in some very key players. You brought some back. You returned pretty much the majority of your production. It starts with Ashton Gelati, one of the best, if not the best pass rusher in the ACC. He had 11 sacks this past year, 3 forced fumbles, 45 total tackles. He is going to be a force to be reckoned with on the defensive line, potentially the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. You also brought back some starters like Des Tell, who was fantastic for the team this season. You also have Jared Dawson. You have Tawfiq Thomas. Jermaine Lole is back for his final year of college. Those guys, I think, combined for close to 10 overall sacks from the interior. And then you brought back Mason Reiger, who was your second best pass rusher. He was second on the team with 5 total sacks, became a very good run defender in the latter part of the year. So the returning production is key. Now you look at who they added. Fantastic what they did. Tyler Barron, one of the best transfers in the country, over 100 tackles in his career at Tennessee. Also has over 10 sacks, 27.5 tackles for loss. Very good run defender at 6'5", 260 pounds, but also very, very good in terms of rushing the passer. Played some on the interior for Tennessee. I would expect him to be on the edge mostly for the Cardinals. So you bring in a player of his caliber, and right away you've upgraded your pass rush by bringing guys back and bringing in a very good player from the SEC level. Then you look at the interior. Thor Griffith, FCS All-American from Harvard, one of the freaks on Bruce Feldman's annual freaks list, 6'2", 305 pounds. From the interior, 55 total tackles, 3.5 sacks, 1 fumble recovery, multiple tackles for loss, and he will be a player that definitely factors into the equation in the interior of the defensive line. You go over to Jordan Gerard from Florida International. He had 38 total tackles for the Panthers this year, 6'3" from Valrico, Florida, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble. You put him into the depth equation. And then not to mention on the edge, players like Adonijah Green, former 4-star level guy, TJ Capers, former highly ranked 4-star level guy who probably will be an edge rusher, maybe outside linebacker that you can consider. Even if you say, okay, they're outside linebackers, don't put them into the equation. Okay, even then, the Cardinals the defensive line is number one. And truthfully, as tough as this overall hypothetical decision-making was in making the rankings, number one was always going to be defensive line. This is going to be the main strength for the Cardinals this season. Because you look at the starting level production they brought back, it is fantastic. Going to be one of the best defensive lines in the conference. The depth is there from the players that they held on to and the players that they brought in. And then the overall talent, I mean, is there. Not to mention you have some local guys like Micah Carter, Selah Brown, Wu Spencer. The list goes on. Very, very, very good team. Xavier Porter, true freshman from Tampa, is a guy that national recruiting analyst for the Locked On Podcast Network, Brian Smith, is extremely high on. But defensive line takes number one for me. And I have to say this, it doesn't mean that the other positions aren't good, because it was really tough when you looked at the tight end position, offensive line, linebacker spot, quarterback as well. I mean, every position here was definitely in consideration for this overall hypothetical. And unfortunately, due to the nature of a top 5, you can only go with 5 position groups. So to recap, number 5, running back, number 4, cornerback, number 3, wide receiver, number 2, safety, and number 1, defensive line. That's going to conclude this month of February shows. I want to take this time to thank you all for once again making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day, whether it be audio, video, whatever streaming service you utilize to access this podcast. We are getting close to 2,000 YouTube subscribers. I'm extremely grateful for each and every one of you all that is listening, viewing, sharing, subscribing the podcast on all streaming services. You can find my Twitter in the handle below on YouTube. The Locked On Louisville Twitter page is at @LO_Louisville. But there will be no Friday episode of the show. We will be back starting on Monday, March 4th. So be on the lookout for an episode on Monday. But that's going to wrap up this month's shows, or this month's content. Everyone have a great day. Have a great end of the month. Be safe this weekend. We'll see you right